Hi, Steve Cassidy here, and I want to talk today a little bit about HTML, but from a more theoretical perspective at the moment, about what actually HTML represents. So we've got the HTML standard here at the whatwg.org website, and that's worth having a look at, and we can sort of see the structure and so on of HTML. And we're familiar with HTML as a markup language. We've started to learn about it and all the tags that we can have and so on. HTML as a computational thing, as a data structure that we're going to manipulate, and the browser is going to manipulate, and your code is going to manipulate at some point. And in thinking about that, there's sort of different ways to look at it. If we look at a little application, here's a little demo application I've been playing with. Experimenting on just building a little weather application, and we can always have a look at the code that goes behind this. So we can view page source here, and in the page source we can see the HTML code, and we can see the opening tags and the closing tags and the different sort of structures that we have. And this code's nicely laid out so that you can sort of see the nested structure, so things go inside other things, and that's the structure of HTML, right? It sort of comes back, you know, that starts with this opening HTML at the top and finishes with the closing HTML at the bottom, and then there's the body and the head and so on. And so everything's nested one within another. So that's the structure of a HTML page that we're learning to use. Now when the browser reads that, your web browser reads that, it needs to store it internally so that it can manipulate it, so that it can actually then produce this display of the page that we see here. It does that in a particular way, and it does that in an object-oriented way, and it uses this thing called the DOM, the Document Object Model. This is something that's been sort of there and since the early days of the browsers. It's how browsers sort of understand HTML pages, and it's important in understanding HTML. And later on, when we start doing JavaScript and parsing HTML using various methods, then we'll really make use of the Document Object Model and understanding it. The Document Object Model basically is a way of thinking about an HTML page as a series of objects, as a collection of objects structured in a particular way. And so the way to look at it is, there's a diagram in this page here. We can look at a little bit of HTML. Here's a little fragment of HTML code, not quite so nicely laid out as the previous example I was talking about. It's not nicely indented, but you have a table, a t-body, and then the t-body ends and the table ends and so on. And we can think about that in this kind of a way, in this hierarchical layout. And so we have here a table thing, object, and we're going to call it a table object, that consists of a single t-body object. So you've got one t-body there that consists of two trs. So there are two rows in this table there, and each row has two tds, table data, and each TD has a little bit of text inside it. And so you can see this sort of object-based structure of your HTML, and that is essentially how your browser understands that HTML content. And so you can see then why it's important that things are nested properly within inside each other, so the table doesn't finish before the t-body does, and so on. That's an important feature of HTML. Now we can see, we had a look at the view source of this site here, and you can see the HTML code that was delivered. This is the thing that was delivered from the site to the browser, and we can have a look at this. But if you actually look at this, you'll notice that none of the stuff, you see I've got a New York weather forecast and a Portland weather forecast, none of that is actually mentioned in here. You can't see the words New York in here at all, and that's because this is a JavaScript powered site, and what's happening is that the content is being generated programmatically by JavaScript code that pulls data in and generates that kind of display. So I can actually have a look at this, and one really good way, and this is a tool that you're going to get used to using, of looking at this, is using the developer tools in, and this is Chrome, there are similar tools in other browsers, to have a look at the content. And you can see this view here of the web page, we can see where I actually clicked on inspect on this this element here, this sort of New York card, and you can see here, in fact I'm looking at the date part of it. As I hover over these elements, you can see they're highlighted on the left on the actual page, which is quite handy for sort of understanding how the page is structured. But you can see it's got this tree-like structure. Okay, so I can sort of expand and contract things. So what we're actually seeing here is a way to explore the HTML structure of the page and the internals. And in fact here you can see that now there's the card template, which is what was delivered, and there's two new cards, and in here you actually get the New York forecast, and these have actually been inserted into the page, into the document object model by JavaScript code. So the view source view is what was delivered from the server. The view that you're seeing here is actually live and is actually all about what is actually in the browser right at the moment. And you can see there are some sort of things down here. You can actually see sort of details of what the document object is that you're looking at in there. So that's just a quick view and a little bit of a think about the idea of how an HTML page, which is a piece of text that you write, is actually understood by the browser as a collection of objects arranged in this hierarchical form. And we'll come back to this later when we start thinking about HTML as the way to controlling HTML through JavaScript and using HTML as a source of data as well as for developing pages. Thank you.